This week on a very dramatic Four Rivers Ag Report. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore drought thou, Romeo? And no rain by any other name would smell like drought. And out, out, damn drought, out I say. I have more stupid quotes than you can shake your spears at. All that and more on the next Four Rivers Ag Report. Welcome to the Four Rivers Ag Report. I'm Fred Peralta. There has only really been one story this year as far as agriculture goes, the drought. It's created weather watchers out of all of us. It's pointed out how fragile, how dependent we are on Mother Nature. No matter how good our genetic scientists, our business leaders, our machinery, or how hardworking we are, it doesn't mean a whip if the weather doesn't cooperate. This drought may be one for the record books, not so much for what it did just to one group, but how it's going to affect the country as a whole. I thought we'd take a look back at many of the stories that WEIU covered this summer about the drought. But first, I'd like to take a minute to remind us that we are our brother's keepers. Farmers may like to talk, but usually not about themselves. If this drought hasn't caused you stress, well, you might be dead. Seriously, the most important farm equipment you should be checking on is the farmer himself. I talked to Suzanne Fish of Michigan State Ag Extension about depression and the drought. With me now is Suzanne Fish. She's a health and nutrition educator for Michigan State University. And Suzanne, I noticed you were quoted an article in Farmgate blog about stress and farming and depression, and how this year more than ever we need to keep an eye on our friends and our neighbors. Can you talk about what stresses are there this year, as if I didn't know?
Well, and I wrote the article primarily because it really tugs at my heartstrings, because I'm a farmer's daughter, and my husband and I farm together, and our hay crop for our second cutting was 1/10 of what we normally get. So as an extension educator, I thought, I think I need to write about this. And some of the signs that maybe we could look for in our friends and family would be maybe changes in routine. Maybe they normally come to the coffee shop and get a cup of coffee. Maybe they go to the 4-H meetings. Maybe they volunteer. And maybe they stop showing up into the coffee shop, and you don't see them around. Maybe their livestock, maybe things are showing some
neglect, or
they're not getting taken care of like they used to. Another big one is farm accidents. When people are stressed out and they have a lot on their mind and they're fatigued.
So do farm accidents really go up this time when people are stressed out or not paying attention?
Yeah, I think I don't have the exact research on that, but I would say because people are more fatigued. Maybe they're not concentrating like they would be if they weren't as stressed out. Definitely.
So this year there are obviously stressors that were not around in the good years. In the good years, you couldn't help but make money farming, and this year you don't know whether or not to spray for spider mites because you don't know if you're going to have enough crop to justify spraying. So what can all this stress lead to?
Well, the big thing is depression. And a lot of times, and I know from my dad, personal experience, they work alone, 7 days a week. He's milking cows by himself. So they don't, farmers tend to figure problems out on their own. But in times like this, we need our family, we need our friends. So if you have a farm friend, go visit them, talk to them, see what's going on. And if they tend to, maybe they used to be outspoken and happy, and maybe they start to look sad, maybe unkept, maybe they had nice clothes, and maybe now their clothes are a little more unkept. maybe they're saying things that they wouldn't normally say, like, "Oh, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna give up." Yep, things like that.
Yes.
Those are kind of those are things to watch out for that could be leading into depression.
So, if you notice these traits in a family member or a friend or a neighbor, what is usually the best thing you can do for them?
First and foremost is you talking to them and being their friend. You know, going and visiting in the milking parlor or just stopping by and going for a cup of coffee. But if you think it's even more than that, find out in your community what services there are. Maybe they have a church affiliation. Maybe there's a community mental health facility. But if you think that's the next step, you could always make a referral. You could call. The really important thing in that thing is just reestablish connections, I think, don't you? Right. Yep. Having a conversation, being there for them. And if you are if you are thinking that somebody might be having some difficulty, suggest they get help. It's not the disgusting word that it was even 10, 15 years ago. No. And I think maybe them hearing it, like, why don't you give the clergyman a call, or why don't you, or I'll go with you. You could suggest that, I think that would be a great friend. Yeah, good fences make good neighbors, and keeping an eye on your neighbor makes good neighbors too. Exactly, and we need that in the farming community. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. This drought touched so many of us in so many different ways. The effect on corn and soybeans is self-evident to most of us. It just took several weeks of little or no rain to get there. In early July, Newswatch's Amanda Richardson spent a day with 2 different farmers who said the same thing. Their plants were fighting a losing battle.
In the 104 to 106 degree weather we had last week just pretty much cooked the corn. And the pollination is pretty much destroyed by the dried out tassels, and it's just a bad year.
Brad Morgan is one of many farmers scoping out his dry, cracking, dying corn crop and realizing his crop will be virtually non-existent.
It's trash, deer food.
He says a lot of his corn didn't get pollinated earlier this spring and summer because of the dry weather, and as a result, will never produce corn.
I farm 1,140 acres. I would be surprised if it makes anywhere from 50 to 75 bushels.
And his struggles don't end there.
I didn't carry federal crop insurance this year. I have hail and I have fire insurance, but I do not have federal crop. This is all out of my pocket.
Just down the road, Morgan's daughter Kim Ross is seeing things get dicey on her farm, where the sun is beating down on her tomatoes.
They're just about that 110 degree, 105 degree heat, just kind of cooked them in the fields. You can see the white sun scald, and some of them have just, literally cooked all the way through. They're squishy.
Plus, since Ross's farm is organic, dozens of varieties of vegetables aren't just battling the sun.
The plants have to compete. You have more weeds on an organic farm, and they have to compete with the weeds for nutrients and water. So definitely it makes everything, the heat and the dry is hard on everything.
Despite their struggles, both Ross and Morgan are just trying to get by this summer while they hope for rain.
I can weather this year, but I just don't want another year like this next year.
Corn and beans we see every day, but what about our 4-legged friends? Livestock farmers are getting a double whammy. Water and feed are keeping them up at night. Anna Giles reports.
We're what you call a cow-calf operation. We have cows that produce the calves, and then we feed them out, sell them for the finished product.
Bill Gass and his family have maintained this cattle farm for generations. But when humidity increases and temperatures hit the hundreds, the going gets a little tougher.
And now the humidity's come up, and that's affecting the livestock way more. High humidity is really bad with the high heat.
Gass says his steers and heifers tend to have the same response to this weather as humans do: find shade and drink water. But for cattle, this isn't the only reaction.
And sometimes you have a cow just through the heat that won't get impregnated. So that's part of our business, to have a cow have a calf. at a timely fashion. It's a burden. It's like carrying, having a job and no pay.
Farmers like Gass are fearing no return on the investment they've made in their cattle. Miss Gass says providing water for their cattle hasn't been a problem because she and her husband have access to a well. But where she's losing money is feeding her livestock.
Well, corn right now is around $7, and the corn that we have in the bin that we're using to feed the cattle, we could be selling that for $7 a bushel, but we need to have it to feed our cattle.
There's a burden on us as well.
Because of the heat, the Gass family is also having trouble producing feed for winter, and they say many of their pastures can no longer be used for grazing.
Actually, probably no feed value to it at all.
All they can do now is hope for rain and cooler temperatures.
But what about the many other crops that grow around here? Early this year, we reported on how the early spring and the bad weather has affected the cherry crop in Wisconsin and Michigan. We just got a report that says the Michigan apple crop will be 90% smaller than usual this year because of the spring weather damage. It's the worst harvest since the 1940s. It's only a little bit different around here for the area's apple growers. Caitlin Jana reports.
It's just like your big trees in your backyard. You'll see the leaves starting to wilt, and on some trees they're falling off. But on an apple tree, they get so stressed out, they'll start dropping the fruit. And we got plenty of trees up there, the fruit's falling off because what the tree is thinking, it needs to lose that fruit to establish its energy back into its roots so it continues to grow and stays alive and healthy.
And to keep those trees alive and healthy, grower Trever Grissom says his orchard is in desperate need of cooler temperatures and more rain. If that doesn't happen, there will be a shortage of apples.
They're not growing like they need to be. They're slowing down a little bit, but we finally got the rain that we needed, so that's going to help. So hopefully in the next few weeks we can tell a big difference.
Growers say every raindrop helps the crops, and you would think lots of sunshine would do the same. But that's not necessarily the case. Just as skin needs protection from the sun's rays, an apple needs sun protection too. These days, it's not uncommon for them to burn.
It may be a pale color on it, or it may be brown from actually cooking and getting that burnt look to it.
And unfortunately, Grissom says there's nothing he could do to protect the apples, and that could mean trouble for his business financially.
Overall costs are up a little bit. The waters, it's not the price of the water, it's the labor.
In Greenup, I'm Caitlin Chana for WEIU Newswatch.
Now, this farm hasn't seen any pumpkins yet, but what we do see are fields and fields of flower blossoms that will eventually produce pumpkins. It's that time between now and then that growers are concerned about.
I've never experienced these conditions that we've had the last couple weeks. Pumpkins are pretty tough, and they'd really prefer it hot and dry as opposed to cold and wet. Worried about continued heat and continued dryness, because even a pumpkin at some point will say, I can't do it in these conditions.
Condell grows 400 varieties of pumpkins with over 500,000 flower blossoms.
Here, here, here.
That need to be pollinated. And they only bloom once. So you can expect Condell has a lot to worry about.
Bee activity when it's so hot is diminished. Sometimes that flower, even if it gets pollinated, will abort because of the heat. That's one reason why we grow 63 acres and 400 varieties, because hopefully not every variety is going to be affected by the heat and the drought.
Because without pumpkins,
I come out here and it's our whole livelihood. If we don't have pumpkins, we can't have the great pumpkin patch.
By this time next week, farmers expect the vines to cover the ground completely. I won't even be able to walk through the rows. It's that time that farmers may have a better idea as to how many pumpkins they can expect for the season. But right now, it's just a waiting game. In Arthur, I'm Allison Twaits.
And if you thought all that bad news might drive you to drink, hold on a second. The bad conditions and heat are also taking a toll on the area's vineyards. Allison Twaits reports the 100-degree days might make for some very dry wine.
Now, the roots of grapevines are much different from other crops. They're able to go 4 to 6 feet into the ground, so they're able to withstand these hot, dry conditions. However, what we're experiencing here today is making vineyard owners very uneasy about this prolonged drought.
We have a saying in the wine business, the wine's actually made in the vineyard. You can't take bad grapes and make good wine.
Bad grapes.
Right now they're hard.
That's what co-owner Dan Webb of Cameo Vineyards is worried about producing this season.
Some of our best quality grapes come from a drier year. Now, when I say dry, I don't mean a drought, and that's our concern. If this continues, we really might have to look at possibly taking some crop load off of our vines so that they don't, actually kill themselves.
So Webb is stalling a grape growing process called canopy management, which should have started this week.
We're going to hold off on for right now because of the temperatures. We don't want to take any foliage off, I don't think, right now, just to try to protect the plants a little bit with that extra shade.
And Webb knows all too well
it's one thing I think I want to wait.
what this means for his winery business.
In 2000, we actually had a very dry spring. We actually did irrigate that year. We did it the hard way, irrigated with just a tank and a hose. Here in the Midwest, with close to 40 inches of normal rainfall, nobody really goes to the expense to set up irrigation because it's hardly ever required. Well, hopefully we'll have enough grapes. If not, we may have to buy grapes from additional sources. When you go visit a local winery, you really want to taste a product that was made there and grown there instead of someplace else.
Studies show that when temperatures reach 100 degrees or higher for more than 6 hours a day, it can result in poor berry color and flavor, producing lower quality juice. And all vineyard owners can do is wait. In Green Up, I'm Allison Twaits.
I'd like to thank all the Newswatch interns this summer for their help with the Four Rivers Ag Report. This year's group was exceptional. I'd wish they'd all decide to transfer to Eastern so I could keep working with them. For those of you who are staying and those to come, you have a tough act to follow. And to those who are heading home, good luck, thanks, and you'll do great. In the last segment of Stinging Dust and Forgotten Lives, FDR has just tried to comfort those whose lives have been devastated by the Dust Bowl. Now the country is trying to deal with the aftermath.
Although hope seemed lost, there were some farmers and business owners who didn't want to leave because they were optimistic. They believed the situation would improve. For others, relief was too late. Forced from their homes, which may have been established several generations before, they hit the road without a planned route. All they had were the words printed on thousands of handbills promising golden opportunities beyond the Rockies. Everything they owned was packed in a jalopy. Mattresses, chairs, blankets, pots and pans, clothes, shoes, and personal objects to remember the happy days were piled high. The future was foggy. A life of happiness left when the rain stopped. As families pulled away from the front door of their home, they tried to show strength by not looking back at the place that brought so much happiness and prosperity. A place that they believed would always be a firmament for future generations. The hardiest of humans would not be allowed to prevail over the land. The land won the battle. Unforgiving of what humans did, the land laughed as families drove down the road for the last time. It was almost as if nature was giving humans a taste of their own medicine. Unable to practice their livelihood, the future prospect of success was very small. All that they could do was dream of a place that would provide food, the staple of the future. Given the chance, former Plains farmers would do anything to provide to their families just a place to sleep and meat to eat.
Well, the reason I left Oklahoma, I couldn't find enough work to do to support my family, me and my wife and 6 kids. And there wasn't nothing to do there but a little timber work, and when you cut a rick of wood and hauled it in town and sold it, you only got $1.25, and you was lucky if you sold it for the rick. Well, if they weren't in farm work, no fruit work, and when you was lucky enough to get a day's work, they paid you only 10 cents an hour. And I left there and come to California to try to support my family and to school them.
Each hour sitting in a truck with the only possessions they had, They were probably thinking where they went wrong. Answers were less in number than the questions. Most of the questions concerned how to get through the day. Silent with distress, the only sounds adults heard were the laughter of children who were unaware of the future. The future was too far in the distance. Each mile was more important than 100 miles. Unsure where the nightfall would stop them, food was the primary thought.
Oh, they put me in a jailhouse on my knees. They put me in a jailhouse on my knees. They put me in a jailhouse on my knees, Lord, Lord. It ain't gonna be treated this way. They feed me on cornbread and peas. They feed me on cornbread and peas. They feed me on cornbread and peas, Lord, Lord. It ain't gonna be treated this way. I'm going where the climate suits my clothes.
As they migrated from the plains, they discovered that they were strangers among thousands of strangers doing the same thing, searching for the rumored promised land where jobs and food were plentiful. As families pulled into refugee camps, they must have had expressions of unbelief. Strangers meeting strangers of the same fortune. Camps not supported by the government were scenes of filth and crime. Hungry, they tried to sell anything they could just to have a potato or flour to make fried dough. Soups were thin. A can of sardines was saved over several days. What they could get was still not enough to feed the stomachs of the children. Many died as a result and buried in unmarked graves with only a few words about the life they lived.
And we landed on over in Copus Peak Camp at Point Conception, farthest point west in California, picking peas, and people was just about starved to death, and no way to get any groceries. The road was very near blockaded between the towns and the point, and people would go down to the preacher, and the preacher had a mother who had some money, and she wired it in to him, and he would take 6-shooters, old tires, jacks, car pumps, anything you could pawn for a little money to buy groceries with. And that went on for 2 or 3 weeks until the peas got ready to pick and got dry enough to pick, and the people went out and they never cleared any money, just enough to barely get away from there.
In that dear state of Oklahoma, in the city where buildings are high, I laid on my pillow so hopeless, looking through my tin shack at the sky. I got up early next morning, out in the cold I did creep, walked off without any breakfast and left 2 hungry babies asleep. And then I left that big city, I walked down 60 Highway. I had a good reason for leaving, so I headed for Pacific Bay. Then I seen the Texas cotton and the Mexico bottomless lakes and the Arizona Gila monster and the big diamond rattlesnakes. One night I heard the little coyotes. I listened to their pitiful whine. I wondered if the poor little creatures didn't have hungry babies like mine. That same night I dreamed of my father. He said, boy, don't never go back. I said, give them dummies your part of that city and that little old rusty tin shack. I started this poem on the desert, my bed lying out on the ground, then covered up my hungry babies and smoked a cigarette and laid down. Then I picked peas in California from 2 to 6 hampers a day, trying to make a few pennies to drive that old hunger away. Oklahoma, farewell.
File this under the law of unintended consequences. Last year, in an effort to deal with the issues of illegal aliens, the Georgia legislature passed and the governor signed a law that was modeled after Arizona's law, the Papers, Please law. The law was designed to catch illegal aliens and deport them. Well, the people they hoped to catch just avoided Georgia altogether. So I guess that's a success, right? Depends on who you talk to. Prices on items like peaches and Vandalia onions are going through the roof, partially due to the law. The farmers had had a horrible time finding people willing to work for the wages that allow for the low prices consumers are used to. No immigrants, laborers equals no labor. Farmers had to raise wages and are still having a tough time finding enough help to pick the crops. So much so that some farmers are turning to the state for help. The state pen, that is. A few farmers are using prisoners to pick the onions and peaches. The prisoners can earn minimum wages, and the farmer gets a subsidy from the government to cover part of the cost. The program is very small, and there's no plans on doing this next year, but who knows? I think what we have here is a failure to incarcerate. Well, that's it for this week. Work hard, be safe, and enjoy the beautiful sunsets. I'm Fred Peralta, and thanks for watching the Four Rivers Ag Report.